On a quiet Sunday afternoon inside the visiting room of Maplewood State Correctional Facility, families sat at small metal tables, voices low, the air thick with the smell of vending machine coffee. Guards stood posted at each corner, their eyes scanning the room while security cameras recorded every movement. Rebecca Cole, wearing her khaki prison uniform, leaned across the table toward her husband, Daniel. They had already shared their allowed greeting hug when he arrived, but now, only minutes into their visit, something shifted. Rebecca's right hand slipped under the table, clutching the sharpened piece of metal she had hidden in the hem of her uniform. In one swift motion she stood, pressed close, and struck. By the time guards reached the table, Daniel was on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, and as Rebecca sat back down, her chest rising and falling, she said only one thing. "Ask my mother why." From the outside, Rebecca Cole seemed like the last person you'd expect to be at the center of such a scandal. She was soft-spoken, polite, the kind of woman who would apologize if someone else bumped into her. But on that Sunday afternoon, inside a prison visiting room packed with other families and watched by unblinking security cameras, she walked out with blood on her hands and her husband's lifeless body at her feet. Why would she do it there, in a place where escape was impossible and every move was recorded? What truth could be so unbearable that it drove her to this moment? The answer, investigators would learn, had roots buried deep in a history of family loyalty, betrayal, and a devastating secret involving Linda Harris, Rebecca's own mother. Was this a crime of passion, a calculated act of revenge, or something much darker, hiding in plain sight for decades before it finally erupted? Rebecca Cole was born in the small town of Brookfield, Kansas, a place where everyone seemed to know everyone's business, yet some secrets stayed buried for years. Raised by her single mother, Linda Harris, Rebecca's world revolved around the two of them. They shared Sunday dinners after church, spent long summer evenings on the porch talking about life, and posed together for photos at every church picnic. Linda wasn't just her mother. She was her best friend, her confidant, the person Rebecca turned to when the world felt too heavy. That bond made what would come later all the more unthinkable. In the summer of 2009, at the annual Brookfield County Fair, Rebecca met Daniel Cole. He was standing by the pie contest table, laughing with friends, his easy charm and warm smile pulling her in immediately. She didn't know it then, but that meeting would set the stage for a love story and a tragedy. Their courtship was fast, almost whirlwind-like. Within a year they were married in the same small-town church where Rebecca had been baptized as a child. Friends remember them at the reception, holding hands so tightly it was as if they were afraid to let go. They seemed inseparable, with Daniel doting on Rebecca and Rebecca beaming whenever she spoke about him. But behind the glow of wedding photos and shared dreams, there were cracks. Daniel could be warm and attentive one moment, then quick-tempered and possessive the next. Rebecca often brushed it off as stress from work or the strain of married life. She started taking extra shifts at the diner, thinking the extra money would help. Daniel, meanwhile, claimed he was working late more often, his absences growing longer and his explanations shorter. It was during those long nights that Linda Harris began stopping by the house when Rebecca wasn't home. At first it seemed harmless. A mother checking in, dropping off dinner, making sure everything was fine. But over time, Rebecca noticed things that didn't sit right. She'd overhear fragments of phone calls between Linda and someone she assumed was just a friend, their voices lowered, the tone intimate in a way that made her pause. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining it. But deep down, something felt off. She had no idea that the man she loved and the mother she trusted were already keeping the most devastating secret of her life. By late summer, Rebecca Cole was nearly halfway through her 2-year sentence for check fraud at Maplewood State Correctional Facility. Life behind bars had become a rigid routine, early wake-ups, head counts, bland meals, and occasional visits from Daniel. But on this particular Sunday, something felt different the moment she saw him step through the metal detector. He greeted her with the usual brief hug allowed by the guards, yet his smile was strained, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit. They sat across from each other at one of the cold metal tables, vending machine coffee between them. Rebecca noticed his fingers drumming against the tabletop, his words clipped, his mind clearly somewhere else. She asked if everything was okay, but he brushed it off. That tension, however, only grew with every passing minute. The conversation wandered into familiar territory. Her release date, plans for the future, his work. Then, almost casually, Daniel made a comment. It was a small thing, just a passing reference to a private childhood memory that only her mother, Linda, could have known. The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the chest. In that instant, pieces of the past began sliding into place. Linda's unexpected visits when Rebecca was away, the hushed phone calls in the kitchen, the strange warmth in Daniel's voice whenever he mentioned her mother's name. Memories she had pushed aside now resurfaced in vivid detail, each one sharper, more damning than the last. A cold clarity settled over her. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was truth staring her in the face. Rebecca's right hand slid to the hem of her prison-issued pants, where she had hidden a sharpened piece of metal, fashioned days earlier from part of a food tray. She rose from her chair in one swift motion, the noise in the visiting room fading beneath the pounding in her ears. Daniel looked up, confusion flashing across his face. Before he could stand, she lunged forward. The blade struck, once, twice, fueled by betrayal and a rage that had been quietly building for months. Gasps and shouts erupted around them. Guards charged across the room as visitors scrambled for the exits. Daniel collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across the gray tile. Rebecca stood frozen for a heartbeat, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on the man she had once promised to love forever. And as they dragged her away, she leaned toward the nearest officer and whispered 6 words that would leave detectives speechless. If you're still here, type "still here" in the comments. I want to see who's following this to the end. Daniel Cole was pronounced dead before paramedics could even wheel him out of the visiting room. The wound was too deep, the bleeding too fast. Visitors who had come that day to share moments with their loved ones now stood in stunned silence, their children clutching their hands, eyes wide with fear. Rebecca, meanwhile, showed no signs of panic. As officers cuffed her wrists and pulled her to her feet, she let out a slow, steady breath, as though the weight she had been carrying for months had finally lifted. There were no tears, no pleas for understanding, only the quiet composure of someone who knew exactly why she had done what she'd done. Hours later, inside a small, windowless interrogation room, Detective Mark Hensley sat across from her. A stack of paperwork lay untouched at his side, his pen resting idly on his notepad. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lean forward in aggression. Instead, he asked a single measured question. Why here? Why now? Rebecca kept her gaze fixed on the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Minutes passed in silence. Hensley tried again, circling the question from different angles, but she gave him nothing. It wasn't defiance in her eyes. It was something else, something quieter. She seemed to be weighing every word she might say, as if she knew that once they left her mouth, there would be no taking them back. By the next morning, the story had exploded across Kansas. Bold black headlines stretched across the front pages. Inmate slays husband in visitation room. Talk radio buzzed with speculation. True crime bloggers pounced on the details, and reporters camped outside both the prison and the Cole family home. But Linda Harris, the one person who might have shed light on what led to that bloody moment, was nowhere to be found. Neighbors whispered that she hadn't been seen in days. Curtains drawn, mailbox overflowing, car unmoved in the driveway. Then, on the 3rd day after the killing, a guard approached Detective Hensley with a message. Rebecca Cole was ready to talk, but only if she could speak to him alone. When Detective Mark Hensley stepped into the small interview room, he didn't speak right away. He simply closed the door, pulled out the chair across from Rebecca Cole, and sat down. The hum of the fluorescent light above was the only sound for several moments. Rebecca's wrists were cuffed to the table, her posture upright, her eyes locked on him with an intensity that felt almost unblinking. She had waited for this moment, and when she finally opened her mouth, her voice was low, calm, and deliberate. "He was having an affair with my mother." The words didn't come out in a rush. They landed slow, heavy, each syllable coated in the kind of pain that doesn't fade with time. Hensley didn't write anything down. He didn't have to. It was the kind of statement that burned itself into memory. Rebecca went on, her tone flat, but her eyes betraying flickers of emotion she couldn't completely hide. She spoke about the day she first began to suspect, months before the killing, when she'd reached into Daniel's truck to grab her jacket and found a small stack of crumpled motel receipts wedged between the seat and the glove compartment. The names were generic, the addresses unremarkable, but the dates were everything. Each one matched a night she knew she had been working late or away visiting a friend. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe he had gone to see someone for work. Maybe the receipts were old. But doubt had a way of growing roots, and it didn't take long for those roots to spread. Then came the text messages. Short, playful exchanges at first, hidden under a contact name that meant nothing to her. But one evening, after Daniel had fallen asleep, curiosity got the better of her. She scrolled deeper, through message after message, until the playful teasing became flirtation. And then something far more intimate. She didn't want to believe what she was reading, but her stomach twisted when she recognized certain phrases, inside jokes, pet names, and memories that could only belong to one person. Her mother, Linda Harris. Rebecca described how she started noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. At family gatherings, Linda's hand would linger just a little too long on Daniel's arm. Her laughter, warm and familiar, seemed to brighten whenever he walked into the room. And Daniel, he'd glance at her mother with a kind of easy familiarity that didn't belong to in-laws. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. But once Rebecca saw it, she couldn't unsee it. And with every accidental brush of their hands, every late-night call she overheard, every excuse Linda made for dropping by, the truth pressed harder and harder against the edges of her mind. When the trial finally began, the story had already spread far beyond Brookfield. Courtroom seats were filled by reporters, curious townsfolk, and family members of other inmates. Rebecca's defense attorney stood before the jury and painted her as a woman trapped in a cage of betrayal, abandoned by the two people she should have been able to trust most. He told them this was no cold-blooded plot, but a moment of uncontrollable rage, a crime of passion, born in the instant her husband let the truth slip. He described her life in prison before that day, the loneliness, the constant replaying of her suspicions, and how the tension boiled over in those few seconds during the visit. The prosecution told a very different story. Elaine Porter, sharp and unflinching, called it exactly what she believed it was: premeditated murder. She pointed to the smuggled weapon, fashioned days in advance from a piece of metal taken from the prison cafeteria, as proof that Rebecca had been planning this. She reminded the jury that Rebecca chose the visiting room, a place where Daniel could not escape and where every second of the attack would be caught on camera. She replayed that footage for them, the grainy black and white images flickering on the screen, showing the moment Rebecca stood and struck. Piece by piece, the jury was shown the evidence, the motel receipts, the recovered text messages, the photographs from family events where Daniel and Linda stood just a little too close. One image, taken at a summer barbecue, froze the courtroom. Linda, in a floral dress, her hand resting on Daniel's forearm, both of them laughing at something out of frame. In another life, the picture might have seemed harmless. In this one, it was damning. As the final witness stepped down, the judge's voice filled the room, giving the jurors their instructions. The tension was almost physical, pressing against the walls of the courthouse. Rebecca sat motionless, her hands folded on the defense table, her gaze fixed straight ahead. In the gallery, strangers whispered, reporters scribbled, and a few members of the public leaned forward in their seats, eager for the next development. Without a word, the jury stood and filed out of the courtroom to begin their deliberation, leaving everyone else to sit with the weight of what they had just heard. And somewhere in the back row, a single empty seat remained, the one Linda Harris never took. The jury's return was silent but heavy, each step echoing against the polished courtroom floor as they filed back into their seats. Every eye in the room was fixed on them, searching for a sign, a twitch, a glance that might reveal what was about to be said. Rebecca sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes forward, the chains at her wrists barely moving. The foreman stood, his voice calm, measured, almost detached. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The words landed like a stone in still water. The sound was small, but the ripples spread instantly. Then came the sentence. Her prison term extended by 25 years, nearly doubling the time she would spend behind bars. There was a soft gasp from somewhere in the gallery, followed by the shuffle of reporters scribbling notes. Rebecca didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, as if taking it in, then opened them again with the same steady stare she had carried since her arrest. For weeks after the trial, Linda Harris kept silent. No public statements, no appearances, no comment to the media that camped outside her home. It was as if she had vanished from the story entirely, until a local television network announced they had secured an exclusive sit-down interview. When the program aired, the camera framed her in a brightly lit studio, her posture rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her expression carried no warmth. When the interviewer asked about the affair, Linda didn't hesitate. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and deliberate. "Daniel loved me more than her." Just 7 words, but they ignited a storm. Social media lit up within minutes, talk shows replayed the clip, and neighbors who had once whispered about the scandal now spoke openly about their disgust. In the prison common room, the evening news flickered across an old television mounted high on the wall. Rebecca was there, seated on a plastic chair, when Linda's words filled the room. At first, her eyes narrowed, her lips parting as if she might speak. A tremor ran through her shoulders, and for a moment her face crumpled, the tears she had held back for so long threatening to spill. But then, something shifted. Her expression flattened, her eyes losing their shine until they were cold and vacant. She looked away from the screen, her jaw tightening as if sealing away whatever emotion had been about to surface. From that day forward, something in Rebecca changed. She withdrew from the chatter of the cell block, no longer joining card games or small talk in the yard. Meals were eaten quickly and in silence. She stopped writing letters to the few friends she had left on the outside. The guards noticed she spent more time in her cell, often seated on her bunk, staring at the gray cinder-block wall across from her. The physical walls of her prison were nothing compared to the invisible walls that now stood between her and her mother. Walls built from betrayal, from shame, from the cruel realization that the one person she had trusted most had chosen to wound her in the most unforgivable way. As the years went on, Rebecca became a shadow in the prison's daily rhythm. Inmates came and went, staff rotated in and out, but she remained, older, quieter, and further removed from the woman she once had been. And yet for all the silence, her story was not forgotten. In the final moments, we are left with images that speak louder than any testimony. A young Rebecca at the Brookfield County Fair, her smile wide as Daniel slips an arm around her shoulders. Linda at a church picnic, pulling her daughter close for the camera, sunlight glinting off her hair. The 3 of them together at a summer barbecue, plates of food in their hands, the kind of easy laughter that makes you believe some bonds can't be broken. One by one the photos fade, their colors bleeding away until they are nothing but black and white memories. Then the scene shifts, the warmth replaced by the cold sterility of prison security footage. Rebecca, older now, her hair pulled back, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, walks slowly down a gray corridor. The weight of time is in her steps. She reaches her cell, steps inside, and turns just as the heavy metal door swings shut. The clang echoes down the hall, sharp and final. And with that sound, the last remnants of the life she once knew are sealed away, leaving only the quiet and the walls. In the end, the steel doors of Maplewood State Prison closed on Rebecca Cole's story. But the questions they left behind will never be locked away. Was she a cold-blooded killer, a woman who planned every step of her husband's death with precision? Or was she a shattered soul, a wife and daughter who, in one devastating moment, had the very foundations of her world ripped from beneath her? The jury gave their answer, the headlines gave theirs, but in living rooms, coffee shops, and quiet conversations across Kansas, the debate still rages on. Some say she was justified, that anyone faced with such an unforgivable betrayal might have done the same. Others argue that no matter the hurt, no matter the heartbreak, nothing could excuse what happened inside that prison visiting room. And then there's the detail that keeps gnawing at those who followed the case, the look in Rebecca's eyes as she was led away, her lips silently forming words we may never truly understand. Was it guilt? Was it relief? Or was it something far darker? The calm satisfaction of someone who believed justice had finally been served, even if she had to serve it herself. So I'll ask you, if you discovered that the person you loved most was sharing your bed and your life with the person you trusted above all others, your own mother, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have walked away? Or would the storm inside you have demanded blood? What's your verdict? Because in the world of true crime, the line between villain and victim is rarely straight, and almost never clean. And if you think this story was twisted, wait until you hear what happened in a small town just 3 states over, where the disappearance of a pastor's wife shook a congregation to its core, revealing secrets that would change the way the town looked at faith and at each other forever. That case is coming up next.